Tamworth. I have driven 6 hours and 30 minutes today. Well, actually I've driven about 5 hours, and then I had a cup of coffee in a place called Warwick, bought some muesli bars, and I have just visited the largest solar farm I've ever seen. It is absolutely colossal. If anybody knows how big the solar farm that's put together by the University of Queensland is in Warwick, if you can stick it in the comments, it is a bloody monster. I went in there inside the gates and went into the side office to ask if I could have a tour, and the guy told me to piss off, and phoned the number on the gate, which I'll do later on. But apparently it's a UQ project, and it is a very, very, very big farm. It's acres and acres and acres under construction. The stuff close to the side office was already on the rack, so it's basically galvanized steel poles coming out of the ground with single axis trackers and what looks like 2, maybe 300 watt Trina modules. So this thing is going to be, I don't know, 50 megawatts easy. Anyway, I'll find out. But listen, I've been meaning to have this little conversation actually for about a week and a half now, in this series of For What It's Tamworth, and the subject matter of this conversation is Bug-splatter. Bug-splatter. Those of you who know what Bug-splatter is will know exactly what I'm talking about, and those of you who don't know what Bug-splatter is will probably wondering what the hell is Bug-splatter and why would he take time out of his day to talk about it. Well, Bug-splatter is the name given to the smudge marks on the windscreen of a car that has impacted an insect at high speed, and the bug has splattered on the windscreen. Now, Bug-splatter is kind of a cultural tradition, I guess, in rural Australia. You can tell if somebody's been out driving a long distance, normally in the rural areas, because they've got bugs squished all over their windscreen or on the grill of the car. And once upon a time, there used to be a lot of bug splatter because there was a lot more bugs. And so I'm driving around at the moment, and I've got a little bit of bug splatter, and I've been driving I'm driving 700 kilometres today, and I've been driving on average about probably 200 kilometres a day for the last 3 weeks. So I don't know, somebody do the math there, a couple of thousand kilometres on the rural roads. But really over that time I have accumulated very, very little bug splatter. Now that's good in a way because insects are very valuable to the ecosystem. We need insects, and having them squished on your windscreen is not exactly a desideratum from an ecosystem's perspective. One of the places I pulled up to actually in Kirindi, which is about nearly an hour south of Tamworth, I got out of the car and the chickens, there were half a dozen chickens, came round and started fussing around the car. And the guy who I was meeting there, who was an army vet, did a tour in Afghanistan, I chatted with him about it. He said, don't worry about the chickens, he said, they're probably just eating the bugs off the car. So I guess there's an ecological benefit in a way. You get some bug splatter on the car and then you go and help to feed the chooks, right? But anyway, but the point is that the reason there's so little bug splatter is because there's so little insects. And this comes back to this conversation about the insect apocalypse. The fact that around the world insect populations are plummeting, and in the order of 80% in some places. In fact, the famous study that came out about, I think 3 years ago maybe, somebody correct me on this, there was a German ecological reserve where they'd had this very long running insect monitoring program, and they came out and said that in a German ecological reserve they'd lost in the order of 70 to 80% of the insect biomass. And they're seeing the same sorts of things occurring where they do ecological studies all around the world. And then there was a meta-analysis about 4 or 5 months ago that came out that analysed a whole bunch of other science papers talking about the lack of insects, and it's this phenomena that's, I mean, I don't know how long it's been going on for, but it's only recently started to get in the press or to get some notice, which is that the insect populations are all dying off. And you wonder why that is. Well, one reason for that is we've changed the climate, and so the ecosystems that underpin the insect populations are shifting and changing, and the insects are either adapting or they're not. Secondly, we've toxified the entire fucking planet with microplastics and the combustion products of fossil fuel burning vehicles like the one I'm sitting in right now. Thirdly, we've toxified the planet with fucking pesticides. I mean, Jesus, they're finding pesticides turning up in everywhere. I mean, they spray food in poison, so it's hardly a wonder that the insects are coming in. But there's another reason as well that I read about a while ago, and I'm just trying to explain it, because what it's saying is that insects are dying. It's a science paper that was saying that insects are dying because of the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. And the logic goes like this. So insects don't have lungs. They don't breathe in and out the way that mammals do. But what they've got is, I think they're called spiracles, which are tiny little holes that penetrate the skin and go inside the body. And it's through those little spiracles that there is the gas exchange takes place. And because they're animals, they metabolize, which means they need oxygen. And basically there's, I don't know how they move the air in or out. I think it's basically just done on that sort of osmotic sort of pressure arrangement. I don't know if that's the right term, but the partial pressures balance out, right? So if you've got more CO2 in the tube, then it's basically going to balance out with the atmosphere. But they've got on the outside of the spiracle, and please, if anybody's an entomologist can correct me on my details, it's hazy, but they've got like a spiracle. He dropped the fucking phone again. So they've got like a spiracle on the tube, and that opens and closes to control the rate of which the gas exchange takes place. Now, so the story goes, the spiracle's opening and closing is dictated by a CO2 sensor inside the cell, or an oxygen sensor inside the cell. But there's a sensor inside the cell that determines how open or closed this little tube is. And so the story goes, as the CO2 increases in the atmosphere, these tubes are either opening more than they should be or closing more than they should be, and the result of that is that the insects are dying of oxygen toxicity. They've got too much oxygen coming in. Now, I read that, I don't know, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and it was quite dense technical paper. I'm pretty sure I got that right. So if anybody knows what I'm talking about and can confirm it in the comments, that'll be good. Otherwise, I'll chase it up later and see if I can find the paper and pin it here. Now, if you think about climate change affecting the insect populations, then that's happening globally. If you think about the toxification of the planet, well, that's happening globally as well, because everything moves. Everything shifts around. Let me show you the countryside where I'm talking. This is Warwick, heading from Warwick into Brisbane. So Brisbane's an hour away from here. I think I'm going to go through Cunningham's Gap. I think, I'm not sure. Anyway, so back to this. And as for the toxification from pesticides, well, that's partly global because that stuff floats around the atmosphere, but probably more localized as well because of, agricultural areas versus forested areas, less pesticides in forests. One would hope that, although one could never tell with us crazy humans. But the problem is if my hypothesis that I'm putting forward about the insects falling over because of the increased CO2 leading to oxygen toxicity, not chickens, no shortage of chickens or turkeys, but like the wild birds that live out in the wild. And so one reason for that might be because the insects are dying. So because the birds eat the insects, if there's less insects, there's less birds. And then you'll probably see that the birds that don't eat the insects, but the birds that eat the birds will probably be dropping off because there's less birds, and so forth and so on up the food chain. And so that when you get species extinction at one level, one trophic level, it affects the trophic levels above it, which is why they are saying that the rate of species extinction could be likely, or explains how it can be so high even though there's only a certain threshold of ecosystem damage taking place. Anyway, while I've got the camera up, so you can actually see my bug splatter. So a little bit of bug splatter as we drive along. I'm actually seeing clouds now for the first time. Look, clouds. I never thought that I would actually go, oh wow, look, it's a cloud. The last couple of weeks, 3.5 weeks, I've been in a land without clouds. Tamworth, a land without clouds. Sounds like a song title of a cheesy country western song. Anyway, yeah, these are big clouds, some big brooding cumulus. Looks like water vapor in the atmosphere. Woohoo! Where was I? Oh, bug splatter. So here I am driving around bemoaning the fact that so few animals have perished on my windscreen. I really wish that I had a windscreen absolutely smeared with fucking dead bugs, because then it would tell me that there were at least lots and lots of bugs around, which there aren't. And about an hour and a half ago, as I did a turn off and went over, I came across the border into Queensland, and there was a river, and I got out of the car, I parked the car and walked down to the river and put my hands in the water. It was actually cool, relatively clear, fast flowing water. It was quite extraordinary. For about 20 kilometres, where it was a fucking charnel house of dead kangaroos. There was probably, I'll reenact it, right? Dead kangaroo, 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 in various stages of dead, from fresh dead, which is where they're still sort of fat and hairy laying on the side of the road, to the parched skeletal remains. There were fucking hundreds of them. And so back to the bug splatter idea. It's almost like in that part of the world there was a healthy population of kangaroos, sufficiently healthy enough that they could be enough of them to be silly enough to walk in front of the road in front of a truck. So in a way, look at all that death and carnage. The charnel house of emaciated macropods was actually in a way an indicator of ecosystem health, ironically. So in this funny situation where I'm actually craving to see an entire pile of dead kangaroos and fucking or something. The bug splatter paradox. Anyway, what else? Okay. So the insect business. I love this expression. It's one of those expressions you shouldn't use around normal people because they'll get confused. But those of you who've got an IQ sufficiently high enough to be following what I'm talking about should get this. It's called the defaunation of the Anthropocene. It's a technical term. It's real trees. So the defaunation of the Anthropocene is the killing off of wildlife in the modern era. And you might also add to the Bug-splatter paradox. Okay, so I want you to be really excited. Transaction fees and the cost of running the business, and if there's anything left over, we're going to put that towards really exciting projects such as Perriam Farm,